And to echo what he said, really appreciate the support of Majors and Quinn and independent bookstores like that. So if you did buy my book from other locations, that is awesome, thank you. But also please help support Majors and Quinn, whether you're buying a magazine, a gift card, or another book. I've already spotted a couple that I'm gonna pick up before I leave tonight. And it's really important to help the independent booksellers. For those of you that know my husband, Charles, he sends his greetings and says hi. So tonight, I'm going to ask a couple of things. One is for additional support. Empathy is something that takes place on an individual level, and it's on a conversational level. As I talk about it, it's one conversation at a time. So if you would be so kind to maybe write a review on the social media, share a copy of the book, share if we take a picture, please share that on social media just to help get the word out so that more people hear the message and find it. It starts small. I was reminded recently that Simon Sinek started by talking to about 5 or 6 people in living rooms, and he's certainly grown and expanded his message, and now a lot of people are wanting to start with why. So thank you for helping do that. And my tag on social media, I'm at Empathy Activist on Instagram or RN Volpe. I think I'm connected to a lot of people already. So thank you for that. Let's see, what else? So Matthew kind of introduced me, and many of you know me. This book started about 6 years ago. I was presenting to a university in San Francisco, a marketing class, and I was talking about insights and strategy and the work that we do, but I was also talking about the role of empathy and how important empathy is in our day-to-day life and in the work that we do in particular, but just in the work that everybody does, in the way that we interact with each other in society. And the students were hanging on the stories that I was telling them. Some of them are the stories that are now in the book. And they voice inside me was like, these are the stories you need to tell. This is what you need to be using to get the word out. And that was the genesis, and that's when I started writing the book. And lots of fits and starts between 2016 and then February of this year when it actually did come out. I was really motivated to get into empathy and understand empathy more as an adult. Starting in 2010, there was a study that came out of the University of Michigan that found that there was a 40% decline in empathy amongst university students. They did a survey of 76 universities from 1979 through 2009. And between 1979 and 2001, there was a 40% decline in the ability to see the point of view of their classmates. And that was in 2001. And if you were in college in 2001, that means today you're in your early 40s. And you are a productive member of society, you are working, you probably have a family started, and you have less empathy skills than your peers. That was really concerning. And even back in 2010 when that study came out, you could start to see that playing out in society, the way we were interacting with each other. And I would imagine many of you would agree with me that that has just continued to make itself evident through social media, through political discourse, through our interactions with each other, through air rage that's happening on flights as people in customer service are getting attacked, literally, by others. There's a breakdown in our empathy skills. And at Ignite 360, because what we do is get to know other people and help our clients see the point of view of our consumers and connect with them on that empathetic level, we started to look at how do you do that? How do you actually, in the moment, make those connections with people? And by observing the way our clients were interacting and where they were getting hung up, connecting, not any of the former clients, they're clients that are here in the room, but of course, how people would be challenged by different situations, and we're all challenged in different ways, each one of us individually. And then how we, and myself as a moderator, the times I was going into other situations and how I would get challenged and what was coming up and what would I need to do to overcome that. And then we also looked at the literature, we consulted with a psychologist, and we landed on the 5 steps to empathy, which is dismantle your judgment, ask good questions, actively listen, integrate into your understanding, and use solution imagination, which is that point where you're finally able to step into the shoes of somebody else. And so that's now what we coach and train, and then that's the sort of backbone and framework of the book. Tell me more about that. Empathy continues. There's that 40% decline that I mentioned. We fielded some research in January of this year that found, we'd asked a kind of what I thought was an obvious, I should agree with this statement, which is I can easily see the point of view of others. But 31% of American adults were unable to even agree with that statement. They were either neutral or they disagreed with it. So again, just more evidence of the challenge that we've got. And yet, there are other studies that came out last year that found 90% of Gen Z say that they're more likely to stay with an employer that is highly empathetic. Empathy, when people have empathetic leaders in the workplace, they're more likely to be, they report that they're more innovative. They report that they have more of a feeling of inclusion and belonging. They feel like they're able to manage work-life balance in a better way. So there's a lot of things just from the interactions at work and by being an empathetic leader that makes things better and people feel supported and nurtured. And then on the sort of consumer side is the way consumers relate to companies. 9 out of 10 consumers indicate that they want brands to show that they understand their consumer, that they have empathy with their consumer through their actions. So the way that you're behaving, the way that you're showing up. 97% of consumers, which is basically everybody, states empathy is the #1 thing in customer service interactions. They want empathy in their engagements with a brand, whether it's at a call center or other interactions and touch points. And yet, only 1 in 4 organizations are felt to be sufficiently empathetic. So you see, like, there's just a lot of tension, there's a lot of problem, there's a lot of opportunity, there's a lot of conversations to be having on an individual level, on a team level, in a lot of different settings and places. So the book, I'm going to dive in. I've got a couple different selections. The book itself, the way it's set up, I looked at my own life and my own experiences before I really had an understanding of empathy. So it's in a section called When Empathy Eludes Us. And then I get into the five steps. So after the light bulb came on and we started to figure things out, started to look at, and each chapter goes into the different steps, and they're my own experiences, usually doing research and the challenges that I've had to overcome. I refer to them as my misadventures in research. Some of them are entertaining, some of them are really touching and sad, but each one of them represents ways that we interact with each other and with people in particular that are other to us. And then at the very end, I kind of wrap up my own personal autobiographical journey at the end of the book with some realizations that I had. So the first chapter I'm going to read is from the first full chapter of the book called It's Like Christmas Morning. And this is about when so I grew up in Indiana, but I wasn't born there, and we moved there from New York where we were living with my grandparents. And this is about the first small town that I lived in Indiana, and it's, I think, a fun story about what my life was like back when life was easy and carefree in the 70s. So we moved to Indiana when I was 3. Before that, my parents and I were living in New York City with my paternal grandparents. I believe and am told that I was in heaven with that living arrangement. And I loved the New York City subway to the point of obsession. An elevated subway line was just a few blocks from my grandma's house. On visits later in my life, I would lie in bed at night and hear the trains pulling in and out of the station. The exhale of pneumatic brakes transported me to the platform and a journey across the cityscape. But my dream life was interrupted when my dad got a job offer in the Midwest. And so off we went. My grandma still recounts how her heart broke when we left. Loaded into the car, my parents and I were about to drive away. I turned and waved and said, "Bye, Grandma, see you soon." Little did I know how much my world was about to change and how much it would change me. In the first Indiana small town we lived in, life was good. I was either too young to know better, or I got lucky in that early experience. I made friends along my street, explored the dry creek bed behind our house, often role-playing with the other kids. I had a best friend, Joey, who lived nearby. Hey, come on in, grab a seat. I had a best friend, Joey, who lived nearby. We were inseparable, except for the inconvenience of his going to Catholic school each day. For me, elementary school came easily, and I enjoyed it. Miss Welch, my 4th grade teacher, even changed my name. Until then, I'd gone by Robbie. She decided I was too mature for Robbie and started calling me Rob, except for a few relatives who kept calling me Robbie as a term of endearment. The shortened name stuck. Even at that young age, the idea of being judged by others bothered me. Joey and I were happy and had our own fun, fueled by a passion for DC Comics and the action heroines on TV in the mid to late 70s. Our role-playing tended to be more Wonder Woman, Bionic Woman, Isis, and Charlie's Angels than Adam 12 or Dukes of Hazzard. In the creek bed behind my house, while the other boys were playing Army and trying to impress the girls by peeing in front of the girls on a large rock, Joey and I would pretend we were Amazons, captured by Nazis and forced to mine feminum, the fictitious rare metal that makes the Amazons bulletproof bracelets. It was literally straight out of a 2-part episode of the Wonder Woman TV series, and we had a blast role-playing in our own little world, spinning around to change into our superhero outfits, catching bad guys and stopping the forces of evil. It was my childhood, and I was very happy. In this small town, Joey and I never got teased by the other kids, at least not then. But our choices of games to play informed choices that others made about us playing their games with them, notably on the t-ball field, which was also the cul-de-sac right in front of my house. T-ball was our neighborhood version of baseball, played with tennis balls so we wouldn't break any windows. There were regular pickup games when the weather was nice, and most of the kids on the street would play as best I can remember. Until one day, when Joey and I were excluded from one of the games. No reason given, they just didn't want us to play. And they wouldn't listen to us when we asked to be included. We were shut out, and that didn't seem right to me, especially since my mailbox was home plate. The kids also threw their personal crap in my yard while they played. It seemed mighty unfair that they would exclude us from playing when they were taking over part of my front yard. Rejected but not defeated, Joey and I went inside my house. My mom was home at the time, and we grumbled and complained, and she listened but clearly wasn't going to intervene on our behalf. We needed to solve this ourselves, she encouraged. So, since we weren't listening to reason, we decided that we should protest. We found some cardboard in the garage, made a few signs that we could carry, and started to muster up the courage for our first protest march. I remember being really nervous. Scared is probably the better word for it. Knowing my best friend was there with me gave me that little dose of extra courage to get me over the hump of hesitation. Except, it turns out he was more scared than I was. He didn't want to go, but I couldn't go out there by myself. I had a brainstorm and told him that, well, if we did it together, perhaps the local newspaper would come out and take some pictures and write a story about how the kids were being unfair. The promise of publicity and the importance of our cause bonded us together and forged our commitment to stand up for our rights. We took our signs, stepped out into the bright sun. We marched around the cul-de-sac, basically right along the bases, but in reverse order. The other kids were staring at us incredulously. Joey stayed right behind me, repeatedly asking me, when is the reporter gonna come? When's the newspaper gonna get here? I was so uncomfortable, but we needed to keep going to get our point across. When they listened to us, that's when we'd stop. Or the combination of summer heat and feelings of awkwardness would get to us first. We only made it around a couple of times before we retreated into the safety and air conditioning of my house. We didn't extract an apology from the kids, nor did we get to play. But we certainly made some kind of point with our protest. Sadly, the newspaper reporter never showed up. In hindsight, that might have been for the best. The headline, "Kids Are Cruel," wouldn't have won the Pulitzer despite its truth. And if I thought being excluded from a t-ball game was cruel, I had a lot to learn. So that's the first section. The rest of that chapter goes through and talks about when we moved from that small town that was much safer to a smaller small town in Indiana, which is when my personal challenges began, and the kids decided that I was gay before I had even a clue what gay was, and that rumors spread like wildfire, which made my life, as I describe it, a living hell. But empathy actually became my secret weapon. It was how I learned to navigate and to survive through elementary school and into high school even, because I started to learn to ask the kids questions, get to know themselves, get to know them, get them talking about themselves, so that hopefully the next time there was a rumor that was getting started or somebody wanted to beat me up, they wouldn't pile on, and they might actually, probably not defend me, but at least not egg it on or make it riled up. So those were the early days. The next section I want to read is actually from a chapter called The Moldy Pancake. So this chapter actually is in the Dismantle Judgment section. And judgment comes from your biases, your stereotypes, your past experiences. Hello? Coming in? There's all sorts of things that we are all having to encounter and deprogram, dismantle in all of our engagements with everybody. And when you're going out on an in-home, as some of you know, that can be really challenging because it can be right there in your face. In this particular chapter, the moldy pancake is all about the things that you eat when you are going on on an in-home with somebody, and the polite expressions of, interesting, that you provide, and other sorts of when do you intervene, what's the difference between making a judgment versus being judgmental against somebody. In this particular section, I talk about a project on cookies and holiday cookie baking in particular. And we were doing, so it's set here in Minneapolis. You might imagine who the client was. Very near, dear to my heart. And I should actually say, for those of you that don't know me, my research career, a lot of the skills that I have today were forged thanks to a lot of the companies that are here in Minneapolis, and actually a lot of the people that are here in this room. And I'm really grateful for that. And so thank you all for the opportunities that you've given me, because it wouldn't have taken us to this place where we are today. But yes, when there are holiday cookies being baked and gift exchanges of boxes of Christmas cookies, we wanted to participate. We wanted to find out what was going on. And so we did what we call friendship circles. So in this particular friendship circle, there was a group of 4 women, and they had all been instructed and asked to bake holiday cookies, whatever they would normally bake, and then bring little, Tupperwares to give out to everybody, and we all tasted each other's cookies. So here we go. At one particular party, set in the inner suburbs of Minneapolis, there were 4 women gathered together around a table. Each baker introduced her cookie, where the recipe came from, and what was special about it. Remarkably, each chocolate chip cookie did taste different. The balance of chocolate, sugar, and sometimes nuts, as well as the thickness and how well the cookie was baked, made each one different. It was kind of like being a judge on the Great British Baking Show, except we could only taste and not provide our opinion. With my Hoosier upbringing, it felt rude not to finish what was offered, so I always ate more than just a taste. And then came one cookie that was different from the others. The woman who'd baked them was lovely, with a big personality, and it added a lot to the conversation. She was in her early 50s, and she had a matter-of-fact, that's the way it is way of telling her stories and relating to all of us. She also had a lot of love infused into her baking and talked about it that way. I was excited to try her cookies. These are gonna be good, I thought. I took one and passed the container on to the clients who were with me. The cookie looked great. Big chunks of chocolate, thick, nicely baked and brown throughout. Not even the slightest hint of charring on the bottom. I bit in. The texture's good. First parts of the flavor were coming over my tongue. Milk, chocolate morsels, hints of brown sugar, salt. Salt? Yes, that is salt that I'm tasting. And not in the way that dark chocolate's made more delicious by sea salt, or the way that the sweetness of caramel can be moderated by sea salt. This was like iodized salt. Not so much salt that it was inedible or a mistake, like the sugar and the salt got swapped, but it was definitely a heavy-handed measurement of salt. In the moment, I was sitting there, eating that salty cookie, trying to maintain my non-judgmental composure, while I figured out what I was tasting. She had said that the cookie was made with Crisco. Would that be the cause? Keep the slight smile on your face, Rob. Is Crisco salty? Rob, visibly engage in the cookie with your eyes and a nod of the head as though you're enjoying it. I'd never tried Crisco plain, but I didn't think there was any salt in it. Now, just swallow it, Rob, and no, it's not the Crisco. Smile in appreciation, Rob. Ask a follow-up about the recipe so it appears you're engaged. There's too much salt in it. Take a sip of water to cleanse the salt out of your mouth, Rob. Maybe this works for some people, but this is not to my taste. There, isn't that better, Rob? But since taste is subjective, I had to roll with it and dismantle my judgment. She's revered by her friends and a good baker, so this must be something she does and that her community likes. Plus, I don't want to be rude, it's not going to kill me, right? Food is such a huge part of our experience in America. What we eat and the stories behind each dish are as varied as the people in this country. Food can make the connection between two people even stronger when they've shared something as small as a cookie. All of these reasons make me more open to giving things a try. If I let my judgment get in the way, let's say I'd commented on how salty the cookie was, made a face, there's a significant risk that I end up insulting the other person, making her feel as though I'm dismissing and invalidating everything that she has to say. That's not good for rapport during an interview with a stranger, as I've mentioned, and it's also not good for people that you know, either at work or in your personal life. If you're looking for collaboration or to get to a decision, you want to minimize being judgmental and instead use your judgment to make good decisions. Less aspersion, more thinking. Having been on the receiving end of people being judgmental toward me, I know firsthand the power aspersion has to make people feel bad about themselves. Being judgmental communicates that a person's point of view is unworthy of your time or consideration, that their opinion doesn't matter, or even that their being doesn't really matter. And this is done in the style of death by 1,000 cuts, doled out in microdoses, or like the slap of a backhanded compliment. I can say with confidence, as I'm sure you probably can too, that being on the receiving end of unwarranted judgment doesn't feel good. My opinion is as valid as yours, as well as the next person's. Dismantling our judgment enables the active listening to others, which is step 3 in the 5 steps to empathy. And then trying to take on their point of view by integrating into your understanding and using solution imagination. Getting over our barriers caused by being judgmental helps broaden our worldview. I've found that by dismantling my judgment, I may even learn a thing or two in the process. And then we go on. Bonnie, you were on a project with me where, in Michigan, where the respondent, this was for dry dinners, so dinner kits, but the respondent bought raw milk for her family. And yeah, it was like, oh, okay. And another situation of like, okay, this is interesting. And so how do you go about, and we did actually experience the grassy raw milk. And it created a really interesting conversation afterward with the clients because everybody came in, nobody was from Michigan, everybody came in with their own degrees of judgment about what the respondent had been doing and whether that was safe or not, and so they weren't listening to the other things that she had to say, so judgment was getting in the way. Just like if I...
Is that me?
No, you were totally open. You were right there with me. You helped me dismantle it all. But yeah, and it's a challenge that we run into all the time. And you know, in research, it's a forced situation, but it happens when you go to the grocery store. It happens when you're at the bank or wherever you might be interacting with other people. So the last selection, yeah, I'm going to read about Frank and dried side dishes. So this was another project. We were in Pittsburgh looking to understand how people use dry side dishes, Betty Crocker potatoes, Kraft mac and cheese, rice-a-roni, things like that. And we were going into people's homes, spending some time sitting down chatting with them, and then having them cook dinner, make dinner, and let us watch and observe. And in this particular in-home that we were doing, Ken was there, and I had another colleague, and then there were a couple of other clients and a videographer that were with us. However, the respondent, Frank, he was probably mid-late 40s. He kept talking about mother, referencing his mom and how he learned to cook, and it was mother this and mother that. And when we had arrived at Frank's house, we were in, I think I said Pittsburgh. We were in Pittsburgh, and the house was an older kind of, I don't know, brick sort of home, and I went to that scene from Silence of the Lambs where Clarice Starling pulls up in front of the house and, you know, all hell breaks loose. So, and we got there, and I was having judgment before we even got in the door. And then we got in the door, and Frank had actually been renovating his house, and so there were a lot of exposed studs that, you know, would be fine if there was evidence of sawdust or other things, but instead there were like objects placed along the cross beams of the studs. So he'd like moved into his renovation. So again, I had more judgment. And then I kept hearing him talk about mother this and mother that. And I have an active imagination, as you can tell. So here we go. What also struck me as unusual is what I found when I excused myself to go to the bathroom mid-interview. I transitioned the moderating to one of my colleagues who was there in a training capacity, left the room, and started climbing the creaky old wooden staircase toward the only working bathroom in the house. As I got toward the top of the stairs, I saw through the banister that there were 2 bedrooms to my left. The doors to each bedroom were wide open. The bathroom was straight ahead of me, and once I got high enough up the stairs that I could see into the 2 bathrooms, out of the corner of my eye, I caught the shape of a person. I inhaled sharply. Frank hadn't mentioned anything about a roommate, a significant other, a child, or another person living in the house. I tensed up as I continued creakily up the stairs. We hadn't heard a sound from upstairs this whole time, and we'd been there for almost an hour. Who was up there? Even though climbing the stairs caused creaks and squeaks to come from the floorboards, I couldn't detect any movement in the room. Surely the noise would prompt someone to look up, but the head of blonde hair that I could see remained still. As I advanced up the stairs, my line of sight shifted so the figure slipped out of view. But what I gained in vision was more of the room itself. There was weight equipment taking up a lot of the space, mostly free weights and a barbell perched above a lifting bench. I'm positive no one was working out while we were there. I'd have surely heard the clanking of weights during the interview. Who was sitting so quietly in that room? I reached the top of the stairs. Instead of moving straight ahead into the bathroom, my curiosity got the best of me. I quietly inhaled and held my breath. Mentally, I thought through what I might say to this mystery roommate that Frank had never mentioned. The bathroom door, which was now behind me, was open and visible, so any "where's the bathroom" pretense wouldn't work. As I gingerly stepped down the hallway toward the open door, I decided to go with an almost as lame as, "Oh, hi, I didn't know anyone was home." I was nearing the doorway when I again saw the blonde-haired figure. I was still not sensing any movement. No rifling of pages of a magazine or book, as if that would be be a distraction from a stranger coming up the stairs. No sound at all, except the conversation from the interview continuing without me downstairs. I peered around the edge of the open door. More weight equipment came into view. And finally, I saw a chair. Sitting on the chair, facing the doorway, was the blonde-haired figure. Instantly, I saw that the hair wasn't groomed particularly well. It was sticking out like a head filled with cowlicks. The straw-like quality of the hair made me realize that this wasn't a person at all. It was a full-sized human mannequin. It looked like one of those Recessa Annie or Andy mannequins that you used when learning how to perform CPR. My mind continued to spin. Why does he have this here? Who is this guy? And with all this talk of mother, I was beginning to creep myself out. My mind went from how I felt seeing the exposed studs downstairs to how I was reminded of the Silence of the Lambs when we first arrived and all those references to mother. I was starting to wonder if I might find mother preserved in the basement like in Alfred Hitchcock's classic Psycho. It was all of these improbable thoughts that led me to start questioning our safety in Frank's house. In that moment, I calculated that, well, since there's 4 of us and only 1 of him, we'd probably be able to take him if he tried anything. Unless he spiked our drinks, of course. But we brought in our own water, hadn't we? And since one of my colleagues had talked to Frank a few times in the recruiting process, someone on the outside knew where we were. That might not increase our odds of survival, but at least our bodies would be found. Or whatever was left of us would be found. And the police would have Frank as a really strong suspect. So ultimately, he would see justice for his crimes. Considering the situation, and since Frank hadn't put on a Hannibal Lecter voice or said anything about making fava beans for dinner, I calmed down and assumed we'd get out of this situation in one piece. That said, I still didn't want to end up chained in his cellar. Yes, all these thoughts were going through my head and stayed in my mental mix. As I finished my business in the bathroom and returned to the group, I was pretty certain I was being irrational and that we were safe. That was me making a judgment about a situation with a person I was being judgmental toward. But then, Frank would bring Mother back into the conversation and my mind would replace his kind, smiling face with images from Psycho. And just like that, I started being judgmental again. I was disparaging this man, likening him to fictitious serial killers for no reason other than the fact that I was uncomfortable with how he referred to the woman who'd given birth to him, who loved him, and raised him. I didn't like that this ugly side of myself was coming forward. In the moment, I couldn't stop it. Even though I'm aware and mindful of empathy and the steps to get there, I still succumb to these base tribal actions of being judgmental. And it results in me not always being as accepting of my fellow humans as I'd like to be. I try to be an accepting individual, I really do, particularly when it comes to our differences as human beings. I enjoy finding those differences and understanding how they impact our actions and inform our beliefs. It's what my career is based on. I feel enriched when I hear from people about their lives. But I can be judgmental. And I know I'm not alone. For me, judgment creeps out of the dark recesses of my mind, wraps its tentacles around my brain, and squeezes the breath out of my ability to reach empathy and compassion. Replacing the empathetic oxygen are the noxious fumes of negative thoughts. That aspersion, being judgmental, can be expressed by a put-down, either direct or subtle. It can be in thought form or let loose verbally. It can show up as thoughts on why someone is wrong or what they don't understand about something, all without my own understanding of where they are coming from. Or I can be judgmental about what they should be doing differently to make their life better, regardless of how attainable or realistic that might be. These moments of being judgmental slip out from all of us, and we need to move past them in order to get to empathy. I try to catch myself as the tentacles begin to reach out, telling myself that I am being judgmental, and I try to see it from the other person's perspective. Or I ask myself why I feel the need to criticize them. Is it based on something real, or is it my own issue? Sometimes that's enough to put the monster back in the box. Other times, not so much. And then I went went downstairs and I rejoined the interview, but actually continued, and then I removed myself again because I had to get to the bottom of Frank's story and figure out what was going on. And I think I figured it out, and I was so fixated on that I don't remember anything else from Frank's interview. And we got into the car at the end, and I was like, oh my God, I figured it out. I know who he is. And it's like, okay, yeah, but what does that have to do with why he makes, dry side dishes? And that's an example of how judgment can just get in your way. And that's why I liken it to being a brick wall. You're not able to overcome it. You have to dismantle it in order to get through and get to the other side. And that is just the first step to empathy. Those are the 3 selections I had for this evening. Are there questions?
I'm dying to know about Mother. You have to tell us what
Okay, so Mother. Okay, so I was also getting a bit of a vibe from Frank. I'm a gay man, and I was like, he's single and in his mid-40s. I'm being judgmental, and I'm trying to put the dots together. Single, mid-40s, well-groomed, decent, like, he must be gay. But I couldn't get him to admit that he was gay. And I would drop hints that I was gay to see if he would pick up on it. And partly because I don't get to talk to that many gay people in research. And so I thought, this would be really nice to be with somebody that's like me and have that connection and have some witty banter and have one of those interviews. And instead he wasn't giving me any of that. So then we'd moved into the kitchen, and he was starting to make dinner, and he was explaining, I think he was using Hungry Jack mashed potatoes, and he was explaining how Mother had taught him how to use shake and bake, and he was going to do pork chop and mashed potatoes and whatever. And I spied on, and all of this is in the book if you want more detail on it, but I spied, perched right above his sink, a $6 million man action figure from the 1970s. Yes! Yes!
The muscle pops out.
Action eye. Action eye. Yes, exactly. $6 Million Man, TV series, action figure from the 70s, with Mardi Gras beads wrapped around his neck. And you're just like, okay, this is now getting interesting. Here's a twist. So our colleague's there, and I'm like, hey, why don't you finish keep talking, ask more questions. Because I want to look around. So I stepped away from the kitchen and started, and I have a rule, I don't open things up. If you leave it out, it's fair game. I don't go into the drawers unless I ask you, what's in that drawer? And you pull it open and give us a tour. So I was looking for the visible things, and he'd had a few photos that were out, and so I'm over and inspecting the photos, trying to see who was in the photo with him, and they weren't even selfies, but they were just pictures of him. So it's well, who was he on that beach with? Who took the photo? No answer. And I'm looking around, and on the studs, from the renovation that he'd been doing, he had so before I even talk about that, he had another thing that was creeping me out. Behind his front door, he had a little credenza that had pictures of his parents and a rose, and his parents had been gone for 8 years or longer. But he clearly had a connection and all the Mother conversation, so that was kind of feeding into all of it. Well, then I'm looking on the studs that are not covered by drywall, and there were a couple of purses that I presumed might have been Mother's. And then I spotted a coin purse, really tiny, but it was beaded, and it was beaded with the rainbow flag on it. And particularly because it's June, we're all aware that the rainbow flag is associated with the gay community. And what straight person has a rainbow flag coin purse out there on the drywall or the studs behind, yeah. So again, still being judgmental, he never told me, but I presumed, oh, he's gay. That's it. That's why he's single. That's why all these things. And I even went back, so that's what I announced to Ken and the team in the car. I'm like, I figured it out, he's gay, woo! Again, what's that have to do with our package slightly? Gay people buy them too. I even went back and talked to my therapist. I sometimes bring my research sessions into my therapy sessions because Greg, my therapist, can help give me perspective on like what I'm hearing, what's going on, and then even sometimes like how I'm reacting, because sometimes it triggers stuff in me as well. And you know, we didn't treat him. We're not his Frank's therapist, but what we surmised was that Frank's relationship to he had a codependent relationship with his mother, and when she passed, he was not in balance with who he was and his identity, and he was a bit lost because his mom had passed, and he was gone, and so he hadn't moved away from that codependency. Hence, you know, and mother just struck me as so formal and very southern. When we were in Pennsylvania, and you know, outside of Bates, I hadn't heard anybody talk like that. So, yes. So that's where the story with Frank ended up. And you know, at the end of it all, I realized like he was just, whether he was gay or not, he missed his mom, and he cooked like her. He used her recipes in a way to honor her and to connect with that memory, and it brought him comfort. And I was wrong to judge him, and I apologized to him in the book, even though his name's not Frank, and we'll probably never see it. But I'm sorry, I felt bad that I did that. I recognized that was wrong, and I was being judgmental, and that's where dismantling judgment is so important. Thank you for asking. Other questions?
What was the hardest thing about writing the book?
Finding the time initially to do it, and then as we got, so in January of last year I started working on editing. So I had a 4th draft manuscript that a few people had read and gave me feedback on, and when I engaged with publishers, I went to them and I said, okay, I know it's too long, and I know it needs some structure and some signposts, and so they paired me up with an editor, and we started working on that. So I think it's not that it was hard, but just going, first it was figuring out, okay, well, what is the structure that made sense? Because originally I had told, I originally wrote it like a traditional business book. So there was like 40 pages of theoretical stuff and then stories and whatever. And that was the first draft, and when I read the first draft, I was like, ugh, I don't like this. This is boring. I want to get to the stories. So I thought, all right, let me rearrange all of this and let me tell my story chronologically as empathy played out for me and my own career developed, and I wanted to see what that started to look like and what story emerged there. And then I was hearing, well, that's great, except you're talking about dismantling judgment in this chapter, and then the next chapter you've got bits of step 4 and 5, and then you go back to step 1, and which is actually what it's like when you're practicing empathy. Your challenges are different with based on the people that you're running into, the situation that you're in, who you're connecting with, and how, and kind of just whether it's Tuesday or Wednesday. So knew that I heard like need some signposts in the book to help people understand where they were. So then starting to work with the editor, it was easy to trim. That was a gift to have too much material, too much data, so find the salient points. But then figuring out what the structure was going to be. And once we landed on the structure, I had on the whiteboard in my office, I had a map of the book, and I had every chapter and story, and I started like, okay, this is step 3, and here's the stories that go with step 3. And for some reason, I decided to start in the middle. So the chapter Peeling the Onion is where I started in the revisions, and I worked my way to the back of the book. And then I came back to the middle, and I worked my way forward. I have no idea why, it's just what felt right at the time. And so the hardest thing then was ultimately figuring out how to start and finish the book. Those were the last kind of pieces, which ultimately are the most autobiographical pieces about me. And even in that journey, you know, I started the book, as I mentioned earlier, in 2016. In 2017, I went to my 30th high school reunion back in Indiana. So my parents moved from Indiana when I graduated high school. I went off to Syracuse, and I've been there 6 or 7 times because it wasn't a pleasant experience, and I didn't have a lot of family there, so why go back? And I went back, and I'm actually, so this is a picture of me just before my 30th high school reunion with one of my classmates. His name is Joe. Unbeknownst to me, Joe was gay as well, like unbeknownst to me while we were growing up. And I didn't realize that he was gay, and we didn't really connect until just
Joey?
before. No, that's not Joey.
Right, I had that
I know,
same
I'm
thought.
sorry.
That same thought.
But Wonder Woman.
I know, like, Joey is gay, actually. And we have reconnected through social media, and he's gay, and he is studying to be a Jesuit priest right now. Which is a whole other thing. That's a whole other thing. But Joe and I reconnected, and in the last chapter of the book, I write about going back to Greenfields and that experience that I had, and how I was able to, during the reunion and the other meals and drinks I had with people, I got to connect with my classmates in a different way. And I got to hear their own stories from their childhoods and the things that they were going through. Joe was, needing to be straight, and he has addiction issues. He actually just passed away as a result of them last month, which is why I'm bringing this photo with me. But some of the other classmates, dad had mental health issues, abuse issues, and I realized we're all just wounded animals. And as kids, we're all just bumping into each other. And that helped me understand, and Joe was part of that, of understanding that it had nothing to do with me when I was getting teased and bullied. It was the pain that the kids were going through. I just happened to be there and the one that they could lash out at. So one of the things that empathy can do, and empathy, when I give a proper presentation on empathy, I have this slide that I love that shows empathy, and then it shows all the skills that empathy enables. And that lets you become the person that you want to be or that you are. And it enables communication and collaboration, ideation and trust, forgiveness, which is what happened for me. I was able to have empathy with my classmates, and it let me reach a place of forgiveness and also compassion. And by doing that and by strengthening those skills, it lets you be a better leader, manager, individual contributor, volunteer, friend, partner, neighbor, member of society. And that's the power of empathy. So, yeah, so the end needed to actually happen in order for me to write it. So, thank you. Are there other questions?
Well, you talked about what was hard about writing a book. I'm sorry. What's been the most rewarding thing about writing the book so far?
So actually, the most rewarding thing has been hearing from everybody now that they've read the book about what has connected with them. And I intentionally, as I mentioned, I didn't want to write a business book. I wrote this book that straddles personal growth, professional development. And I've heard from people, and it's lovely to hear from friends and family members that they like it, but I know you're a little biased. But I do appreciate the honesty. But it's when I've been hearing then from that next level out. And that's where I need your guys' help in continuing to expand and get the word out. But I had one friend of a friend that I've never met. She's a senior marketer, and she read the book, and she told my friend to tell me that she now interacts with her CEO differently, and it's made her a better people manager because of the things from the book. Another woman reached out to me. She told me that she had read the book, and her 13-year-old son came to her, and he was having issues in English class, I think it was, and they live here in the Twin Cities. But somebody I'd never met before, she reached out to me on LinkedIn. And she, he comes to her and he's having this trouble in class. And instead of saying to him, "Why are you struggling in English?" she thought about the book. And she said, "Well, tell me more about that. Tell me what's going on." And she said that it opened him up in a way, and they had a much richer, deeper conversation than they had ever had before on the topic So that to me is the ultimate gift of the book, is that it's resonating with people, and it's something that sits in your mind, so that when, I had somebody tell me that, they were getting cut off on the road and they were about to honk and raise their fist, and then they realized, wait, nope, like I don't know what that person's day is like, I don't know what's going on with them, why am I being judgmental? Just let it go. That to me is like the most rewarding thing, when I'm hearing those stories. So thank you for asking.
Good for you.
Carla, you had a question?
I do. Man, what a time to have written a book about empathy. And physically, where we are right now, what a place to be talking to us about empathy. As I came around the corner, I passed some of the murals that we know went up just after George Floyd was murdered.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering about your energy and how much the universe is drawing upon you right now, because there's such a desperate vacuum of empathy and such a need for empathy, and here you are.
And here I am, and here's the book. Yeah, I started working on the book in 2016, and I definitely, as things were changing in the political climate, and as I was talking about the empathy crisis, just continued to get worse and worse and worse, and things were happening, I was starting to feel pressure. And I remember in 2018, I was having a session. I see an energy healer in San Francisco who's just amazing and like crazy, phenomenal, spot on. And her name's Marie. And I was having a session with Marie, and I was like, I've got to get the book out. And she was like, there's no rush in divine timing. The book will be ready when it needs to come out. And as it turns out, had it come out in 2018, yeah, we needed it then. But after the pandemic, after George Floyd's murder, after the election tension, after January 6th, after everything that's been going on, we just needed more and more. So, I think about it, and Marie also helped me realize that this is about one conversation at a time and connecting with people. And I said at the beginning, Simon Sinek started talking to people 5 at a time in a living room. It's every conversation, and it's not just me, we are all empathy activists. We can all have these conversations, we can all choose and have the courage to act with empathy and to help other people understand what it means to be empathetic and to benefit from that. That's how we're going to make the world a better place. Thank you for asking. Other questions?
If we wanted to share this knowledge with more people, do you do sessions? Do you do teamwork?
Yes. Yes, we do a lot of different things. So Ignite 360 has training programs, Empathy Camp, which I think a few people here have been through. And those are workshops for empathy with teams. I've also been giving talks on empathy. The woman I told you with the 13-year-old son, her group, she works at a health insurance company here in town, and they've started to do an employee reading group, and they're using the book as the first piece, so I'm talking with them on Friday. So yeah, do a lot of different things, so happy to explore what makes sense, because every team is different, and some need training, others need awareness, others just need to read the book, and it will magically
Do you find some people are hostile to the whole idea of empathy, that it's a weakness?
Well, somebody gave me 1 star on Amazon over the weekend. I'd say yes. Yeah, no, but seriously, yes. It's just easier to be judgmental. It's easy to be nasty. It's easy to cut other people down. And we're also fighting the patriarchy of the way things used to be, which meant that emotion, feeling, supporting people had no place in the workplace. And we've heard loud and clear through the Great Resignation and all the events of our time that that is not the way forward. And it never has been the way forward. If you think about who's really been successful at work, in their careers, most of them have been empathetic leaders because they can nurture and support and bring out the best in their teams. But yes, empathy is squishy. There's two types of empathy. People often think about emotional empathy. I write in the book about cognitive empathy because cognitive empathy is what we use more in our day-to-day interactions. It's that perspective taking, where emotional empathy is the feeling, the emotions of somebody else, and that can be a lot harder. And I have one slide in one of my presentations that it's the E word that people are afraid of, and it's a picture of a bunch of Gen Zs staring at a horror film, screaming, because people are afraid of it. They're afraid of emotions, they're uncomfortable with it. So I try to demystify it. No, talking about cognitive empathy, perspective taking, you can stay up in your brain, it's all good. It's all good, you just have to be able to see the point of view of somebody else. Other questions? Thank you guys, I really appreciate it. This means so much. I want to do a quick, big group photo, if that's okay, and then we'll move over and I'll sign.